We begin, though, with the possibility of major job action here in Canada. More than 155,000 federal public servants are in a position to strike this weekend after putting it to a vote. The big issue? Wages. Chris Aylwar is the National President of the Public Service Alliance of Canada. Mr. Aylwar, thanks for coming in.
A pleasure.
You said today you have an overwhelming strike mandate. In my experience, when unions have a number like that, they release the percentage. You're not doing that. Why not?
We don't release numbers at PSAC for strategic reasons. We did this strike vote, as we said this morning, was overwhelming. If it wasn't, we wouldn't want that out there. So we simply don't release that. But I can tell you that it was overwhelming support for a strike mandate.
Like over 75, over 80, over 90, what are we talking about?
If it was being graded back in grade school, it would get an A+.
Okay, all right. So your members have done this, and you have the strike mandate now, but where are things at the negotiating table? I mean, are we inevitably going to see a work stoppage by your union?
We're at the bargaining table this week with Treasury Board. Our members at the Canada Revenue Agency go back to the table next week. So we're hopeful that, now that we've announced the results of the strike mandate, that this government comes to the table with a real mandate to get a deal. Our goal is not to go on strike, and we've said that from day one. We want to get a tentative agreement, but our members have made it very clear if that's not achievable at the bargaining table, then they're prepared to take job action.
Treasury Board says that significant headway has been made over the past week in addressing many union demands. Do you agree with that assessment? Are you making progress?
Some progress is being made, yes. Some progress. I wouldn't go beyond that to say that there has been some progress the last week at the bargaining table.
So significant headway would be overstating it?
I would not characterize it as significant at all.
So how far apart are you on wages? Because cost of living and salary increases was at the core of what you talked about today. There have been some reports that certain segments of your bargaining union are looking for compensation packages and other benefits that add up to like 47%. Mm-hmm. I mean, are you looking for something in that range across the board? I mean, how do we interpret these reports?
No, I mean, that's what we're looking for at the bargaining table with our Treasury Board members for the 120,000 members that we represent at Treasury Board. We're asking for 4.5% per year as a general economic increase. So that's 13.5% over those 3 years. For that same period, inflation, 13.8%. So we've said from day one, we want to make sure that our members are not falling further and further behind, and we're somewhat at least keeping up with the cost of living and the rate of inflation. That's why we have asked for 13.5% over those 3 years at 4.5% per year.
So when I was in the budget lockup for Budget Day, the budget briefing, we were told that pay increases were baked into the fiscal forecast. Could you find it? We looked for it. There's no line item there. I mean, what can you tell us in terms of what the government is offering you and what the gap might be on an annual basis?
So what we've seen so far from the government as far as a wage increase is just a little over 2% per year. Workers in this country, right across the country, from Newfoundland and Labrador to British Columbia, are extremely frustrated and fed up. They're working day in, day out, going to work every day, sitting back, watching corporations make record profits. But nobody wants to pay the workers. Everybody is just like, repress the workers, keep the workers' wages down. That doesn't make sense at all. Why should the wealthy corporations make record profits while we're being gouged at the grocery store aisles, at the gas pumps? Workers in this country need a fair and decent wage increase just to keep up with the cost of living. As we said this morning, workers are going in debt. They're making sacrifices just to try to make ends meet. This government has said they believe in workers. If they believe in workers, bring a mandate to the table that provides for fair and decent wage increases.
Corporate profits, I would understand as an argument if you were representing private sector workers and negotiating with a corporation that had big profits. How does that apply to a negotiation with a government that's running a deficit that's in the tens of billions?
Everybody is feeling squeezed in this country because of the cost of living. Federal public sector workers are no different. We're feeling squeezed along with everyone else. So when we refer to corporations making these record profits, again, though, they're continuously putting workers down and trying to repress workers' wages. In 2020, private sector employers provided on average a 4.7% wage increase to their employees. And that's in line with what we're asking for, because those employers recognize we have to do that to maintain the ability and to attract people. So if private sector employers can provide a 4.7% increase per year, the federal government can provide a 4.5% increase to avoid, the largest strike in Canadian history. Again, we don't want to go on strike. We want to get to a deal.
Right, but the private sector, I mean, they're doing a lot of this now. They had a lot of job cuts and layoffs throughout the pandemic. They had a lot of downsizing. Public servants like you and I, people who were funded by the government, we kept our jobs, right? We had that level of protection. So, I mean, can you do a straight comparison with the private sector, given the security that public sector workers have had over the last difficult number of years compared to what's happened in the private sector?
Absolutely. One of the issues at the bargaining table this week is on wages, but it's also, when you look at our firefighters, our tradespeople, that we represent, our members that work on ships' crews, they're being paid far less than what the private sector employers are paying for doing the same job. So that's why we're asking this government to come to the table with a deal that's fair and set that bar. Set that bar for all workers in this country so that it sends a signal to employers, whether they're unionized, non-unionized, private sector, public sector, that every worker in this country deserves a fair and decent wage increase, again, to keep up with the cost of living.
So you've got your strike mandate and you laid out your arguments. What's your deadline for the government to have a deal on this? I mean, having the mandate is one thing, setting a deadline's another. So what's your time frame to avoid, as you described it, the largest public sector strike in Canadian history?
We're at the bargaining table this week. We're scheduled to be in bargaining until Friday. If we're not working on the weekend, that will not be a good sign. I am hopeful that we are going to be working through the weekend.
By working, you mean the bargaining team, not your members, right?
Correct, yes, that the bargaining teams will be working over this weekend. In respect to, again, the deadline as to when, today, as of today, our 120,000 Treasury Board members are in a legal strike position. And on Friday, April 14th, sorry, our 35,000 members at the Canada Revenue Agency will be in a legal strike position. So we haven't, set that date yet to say to the government, if we don't get a deal by this date, then there will be a strike. But we're certainly signaling that we're in talks this week. We're currently at the bargaining table, and we want to stay there until we get a deal.
Given everything you said about cost of living and high expenses and how everyone is bearing that, including your members, with an offer of a little over 2% a year, looking for 4.5% a year, can your members really afford to go without their salary and go out on strike for a 2% annual wage gap, given the cost of living they're facing and given the fact that there is a pay raise on the table?
What they can't afford to do, David, is not to go on strike. In the current economic context that we're looking at, workers can't be kept, just falling further and further and further behind. So workers can't afford not to go on strike. And when you take that 2% that you talked about, or a little over 2%, and project that out 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, what does that really mean in somebody's pocket? So again, that's why we're asking for the wages that we're asking for. And yes, it might not sound like, well, they offered you a little over 2%, you want, over 4%. Yeah. It doesn't seem to be a big difference.
Well, compounded interest adds up over time, right?
Right.
But I've been on a picket line in my life, and I hated every minute of it. And you lose about 2% of your salary a week.
No, we can demonstrate, David, I'm sorry, but we can demonstrate otherwise, that when workers go on strike, the benefit from going on strike was far beneficial than not going on strike. So basically, what was the offer on the table before?
Over the life of employment, you mean?
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So you're prepared to do that, to go out. So you're not at that point yet. Obviously, you're prepared to do it. You wouldn't have this mandate. But so if you're not working through the weekend, as you'd hoped, is that then become a trigger to set a strike deadline to try to focus the mind and move the talks at a faster pace? Or do you hope to get back to the table on Monday? I mean, where does that sit right now?
As I said, I'm hoping that we're going to continue talking until we reach a tentative agreement. So that's where I am. And again, whether we're doing that or not is really now up to the government. Our members have spoken very clearly and very loudly that they're prepared to take job action. As I said, our goal is to get to an agreement, not to go on strike. That's up to the government.
Okay. Chris Aylwar, thanks for your time.
Thank you, David.